about how you can use the 5E lesson format to implement project-based learning in your own classroom. This webinar is brought to you courtesy of my AD 8750 class at Clemson University in Instructional Effectiveness Methods. So here we go. When you are looking at the tips by Jeff Marshall in The Highly Effective Teacher, and you assess yourself, you can easily see which areas you are weak in. And for me, I found that my weakest area was in tip 6, which is a creative problem-solving culture. And this is for a few reasons. First up, I have found in my own practice that I all too often fall into the trap of telling my students the information before they have a chance to explore on their own. And I also fail to include multiple perspectives. And it's easy to blame this on my students' young age, as they're only first graders. But as you'll see during this webinar, the 5E plan can really help you to incorporate those multiple perspectives and a positive discourse that will add so much to your classroom. So here we go. So as I said, in a creative problem-solving classroom, students are using creative approaches to solve ideas, share ideas, and collaborate with others. And with interdisciplinary project-based learning, it is integrative. So students are combining their reading, writing, math, speaking, listening, and science skills. So it's very cross-cutting. It allows students to learn by doing and applying ideas. Now, this is backed by research in the Cambridge Handbook of Learning Sciences, which I'll reference more at the end of this presentation if you'd like to read more about the research to support this. But it really allows students to make connections and allow for deeper thinking. What this format is not is a summative presentation of knowledge. So all too often I find myself using these projects after I have finished teaching, and it's sort of just a fun thing to do. What this should be is that it is the vehicle for learning. And it's also not going to be those closed-ended questions. We want to use open-ended questions that get students thinking, collaborating, and revising. So in my own classroom, I'm planning on using the 5E format to plan lessons that can cover those cross-cutting standards. And through that process, I'll be able to get my students considering those multiple perspectives. They'll be designing things, and also throughout it all, they'll be collaborating and sharing novel ideas. So let's look a little bit deeper at what the 5E lesson is. These support the next generation science standards, which I'll show you at the end of the webinar has a variety of resources that you can use. So the 5E lesson follows a 5-step framework. And what you want to remember is that your front loading is minimized. You don't want a lot of teacher talk before students get to work. So it has 5 stages: engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. And these are not expected to be done in just one lesson. It's really going to take you many days to do one of these lessons. So the first stage is engage. This is where you're hooking the students, getting them excited, and assessing that prior knowledge. So my favorite ways to do this is through addressing a common misconception that students might have, like the earth is the center of the universe and the sun goes around it. Or a weird but true phenomenon. This always gets them very excited. And then finally, an open-ended question that gets them thinking and talking with multiple perspectives happening. So you have your students hooked, and now it's time to explore. So in this stage, students are using hands-on ways to learn more. So they're planning, they're collaborating, they're making guesses or hypotheses, they're testing, they're revising, and they're refining their ideas. And throughout all of this, they're expected to be speaking and listening to others to get those multiple perspectives involved. After students have had a chance to explore, which I kind of like to think of as experimenting with the idea, then you're ready for your traditional direct instruction. So this is when you can start explaining what the students observed and experienced. And the reason why I like this format so much is because we know how important that prior knowledge is for students, but so many students come to school without experiences to connect the content to. So the beauty of this lesson format is that it gives all students an experience to connect those formal concepts to, not just some students. So after you have explained and done your more traditional instruction, and that the students are allowed to connect what they experienced to what the concept is, using those vocabulary terms that are so important, then they're allowed to revisit this using a new situation. So they're applying that new concept or the new vocabulary to a unique situation that's different from what they did in the first stage. So of course, it's critical that they're collaborating with each other and reflecting on what they're doing. And this is really a great way to differentiate as well. If you want to group students and assign roles, and you can base those roles on the student interest or ability levels or talents. After you have finished that elaborate and extend, then you're on the last stage, which is evaluate. Now, what you're not going to do is assess students with a paper and pencil test, fill in the bubble, or cut and paste. What you want to be doing here is using a variety of choices for students to demonstrate what they have learned or change in their thinking. So some of my favorite ideas for these methods of showing what they've learned include making a poster or a brochure, creating a skit with other students. If the technology is available, they can make a video or a PowerPoint, or they could even design a comic strip or write a written piece. This allows you to get the students using their talents. They're engaged because it's an organic artifact that they're creating. It's authentic to them. It means something to them. And also, it's going to give you so much more data than just a paper and pencil test. And you can use those artifacts from your evaluate stages, from different lessons, to create a portfolio throughout the year. So, some helpful tips. First up, when you're planning these lessons, you want to map out standards and objectives across content areas. Now, because these lessons take so much time, which is precious, you want to make sure that you can include as much math, writing, reading, researching as you can throughout the process. Don't limit yourself to just science. Create guiding questions that are open-ended but still focused. So instead of saying, "Where are shadows?" which is too vague and might get students off track, try something like, "Do shadows ever change?" Instead of something that's too focused, like, "Use these plants to reduce the erosion in your sand bucket," try something like, "How can we reduce erosion and have some different supplies set out?" This lets the students think outside the box and you're not leading them too much. Now, for more information, if you want to look at the research that supports interdisciplinary project-based learning, you can follow this link here, and it will take you to Chapter 19 of the Cambridge Handbook of Learning Sciences, and it's only about 15 pages, and it's really an interesting read that gives you the background of project-based learning, what it entails, and tips for implementing it. If you're interested in learning more about the 5E lesson plan, this website here, We Have Kids, has an excellent article with helpful tips for creating each stage in the lesson plan, and it was written by a teacher in the real world, so that's what I like to see. And then finally, if you click the Next Generation Science Standards, they have a really helpful infographic that breaks it all apart for you. And also, if you continue scrolling, you can see the lesson plan templates that they have and a wealth of other information that can really help you as you learn and begin implementing this into your own classroom. So I hope that this webinar was helpful, and I hope that you are able to start implementing 5E lessons in your classroom. I know that I will be soon with our next study of the moon in science in first grade. So thank you for listening, and happy teaching.